It was a somber, gray morning in Arlington, a day when the skies seemed to weep alongside those gathered. General Sarah Thompson had attended many funerals, but none compared to this one. Today she was burying her son, Sergeant David Thompson, who had lost his life during a routine patrol in Afghanistan. A roadside bomb had claimed him at just 28 years old. Dressed in her full military uniform, Sarah felt the weight of her grief pressing heavily on her chest. She wore the uniform not out of obligation, but to honor David's wish that she stand tall on such a tragic day. As her family arrived in a long black SUV, Sarah sat between her brother Mike and David's best friend, Sergeant Alex Reed. Her hands shook as she clutched the folded program featuring a smiling photo of David in his fatigues. It didn't feel real. As they neared Section 60, reserved for those who had recently fallen in battle, the sound of a military band warming up filled the air. Rows of soldiers stood at attention, rifles angled downward, embodying a precise, organized grief that only the military could deliver. "I don't think I can do this," Sarah whispered, her voice flat and drained. Alex gently squeezed her hand, offering quiet support. "You can, Sarah. You've faced worse." With a deep breath, Sarah stepped out of the car, the sound of her heels echoing against the pavement. People nearby turned to look, some offering salutes, others whispering her name. She was a recognized figure, the first woman to attain 4-star rank in the Army. Yet today, she was just a mother, walking toward the most heart-wrenching moment of her life. As Sarah and her family approached the cemetery, an air of solemnity enveloped them. The long black SUV pulled to a stop, and the atmosphere grew heavy with anticipation and sorrow. Sarah's brother Mike exchanged glances with Alex, both of them feeling the weight of the moment. Stepping out of the vehicle, Sarah felt her heart race. She was surrounded by familiar faces and fellow soldiers, yet today felt different. Today she was a grieving mother, not a military leader. Clutching the folded program tightly in her hands, she could almost feel David's presence beside her. The photo on the cover, a vibrant image of him smiling in his military uniform, seemed to mock the reality of the day. As they walked toward the designated area, the sound of the military band filled the air, low and mournful. The notes hung heavily, amplifying the ache in her chest. The family gathered near the gravesite, and Sarah's gaze drifted to the row of soldiers standing at attention. Their uniforms were crisp, their faces stoic, embodying the discipline drilled into them through years of service. As she stood there, the gravity of her loss overwhelmed her. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered to Mike, her voice barely audible over the somber notes of the band. "You've faced battles before, Sarah," Mike replied softly, squeezing her shoulder in a supportive gesture. "You can get through this." Taking a deep breath, she nodded, trying to summon the strength she had cultivated over years of service. With each step toward the gravesite, she braced herself for the emotional storm that awaited her, knowing that today was not just about loss, but also about honoring a life dedicated to service. As Sarah stepped toward the gravesite, her heart pounded in her chest. The somber atmosphere was punctuated by the quiet murmurs of mourners and the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. However, her focus shifted abruptly when she noticed a police officer pacing near the parked vehicles. Officer Mark Jennings, clad in dark sunglasses, appeared out of place amid the solemnity of the occasion. His hand rested casually near his holster, and something about his demeanor made Sarah uneasy. "Is he here for security?" Mike asked, glancing toward the officer. Sarah shook her head, uncertainty gnawing at her. Officer Jennings was not part of the security detail assigned to the funeral. He was merely there for traffic control, unaware of the significance of this gathering. Her stomach tightened as he turned toward her, brow furrowing beneath the brim of his cap. "Excuse me, ma'am. Can I see some identification?" Jennings barked, his tone abrupt. Sarah blinked in disbelief, momentarily stunned. "I'm General Sarah Thompson," she replied, trying to maintain her composure. "I'm here for my son's funeral." "Stop right there," Jennings shouted, his voice echoing across the cemetery. The tension in the air thickened as gasps erupted from the crowd. A child cried out, and Sarah froze, instinctively raising her hands. "I'm not armed," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "This is my dress uniform. You're making a mistake." But Jennings was unmoved, his gun now drawn and aimed at her chest. The funeral attendees were paralyzed with fear, unsure of how to react. Sarah remained still, her heart racing, caught in a nightmare she never expected to face on such a tragic day. The world around her fell silent, and all that remained was the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. With her hands raised, Sarah stood frozen. Every muscle in her body tensed as Officer Jennings kept his weapon trained on her. The crowd around them gasped collectively, shock and disbelief painted across their faces. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily in the air, and the atmosphere shifted from one of mourning to sheer terror. It was a surreal moment. A grieving mother, dressed in her military uniform, was now at the mercy of a man with a gun. "Get on the ground," Jennings barked, the aggression in his voice cutting through the stillness. "Asadizar." Sarah's mind raced. She had spent decades training soldiers to handle threats, never imagining she'd be on the receiving end of such hostility during her son's funeral. "I'm unarmed," she insisted, her voice steady but strained. "I'm a general in the United States Army. You're pointing a gun at a mother on the worst day of her life." Deliberate and calm, she tried to convey her identity, but Jennings was unyielding. "I don't care what you are," he snapped, his finger dangerously close to the trigger. Nearby mourners, including David's friends and fellow soldiers, were visibly shaken. They exchanged worried glances, unsure whether to intervene or remain silent. "Sir, that's General Thompson. You're making a catastrophic mistake," shouted Mike, stepping forward in a desperate attempt to defuse the situation. The tension escalated as Jennings swung his gun toward Mike, causing the crowd to gasp again. A veteran in the back shouted for someone to tackle Jennings, but Sarah raised her hand slightly, signaling for calm. She didn't want to escalate the situation further. Her focus remained on ensuring no one else would get hurt. As she slowly lowered herself to the ground, her heart shattered. This moment was supposed to be about honoring her son. Yet it had turned into a scene of chaos and fear. As Sarah knelt on the ground, her heart raced with a mix of fear and disbelief. She felt the weight of all the eyes upon her, the tension palpable as the crowd held their breath. Just when it seemed the situation couldn't escalate further, a different officer rushed into the scene. Lieutenant Emma Carter, who had been overseeing traffic flow near the entrance, spotted the chaos unfolding from a distance and sprinted toward them. "Mark, holster your weapon now," she shouted, her voice firm and authoritative. But Jennings remained fixated on Sarah, his expression grim and unyielding. Emma, determined to protect Sarah, moved quickly, pushing Jennings' arm upward with both hands, forcing the gun away from Sarah's chest. The weapon clattered to the ground, a moment of relief washing over the crowd as gasps of astonishment filled the air. "Step back," Emma commanded, grabbing Jennings' arm and twisting it behind his back. The tension began to lift as other officers rushed in to assist, restraining Jennings and moving him aside. Sarah remained on her knees, both hands resting on her head, still processing the traumatic turn of events. She could feel the stares of the mourners, a mix of shock, support, and disbelief. Sergeant Tom Lewis, a fellow soldier who had served with Sarah, approached her cautiously. "Ma'am, it's okay now. You're safe," he said gently, helping her to her feet. As Sarah stood, her knees felt weak, but the support of her family and fellow soldiers bolstered her strength. The reality of the situation began to sink in. This was not just an isolated incident. It was being recorded on multiple phones. The shocking image of a mother in uniform facing a drawn weapon would soon go viral. The funeral, meant to honor her son, had become a moment that would resonate far beyond the cemetery, igniting discussions about respect, authority, and racial profiling across the nation. As news of the incident spread, the atmosphere in the cemetery shifted dramatically. What was supposed to be a time of mourning quickly turned into a media spectacle. Sarah stood in disbelief as reporters arrived, cameras flashing and microphones thrust toward her. The moment Officer Jennings had aimed a gun at her during her son's funeral was already making headlines, capturing the attention of a nation. Social media erupted with outrage, and videos of the confrontation went viral almost instantly. People were appalled by the sight of a grieving mother, dressed in military regalia, being treated as a threat. The hashtags #justice for General Thompson and #SheServed began trending, reflecting the collective anger and support from the public. Friends and family members of David, along with fellow service members, rallied around Sarah, sharing their own experiences with discrimination and the struggles they had faced in and out of uniform. Within hours, prominent figures began to weigh in. Senators and civil rights advocates took to Twitter, demanding accountability for the actions of Officer Jennings. The Arlington Police Department faced mounting pressure to release a statement, but their initial response was vague, simply acknowledging an incident involving one of their officers. This only fueled the fire, prompting more criticism and calls for justice. Meanwhile, Sarah found herself surrounded by a group of fellow soldiers and friends, all offering their support. "You're not alone, Sarah," one of David's friends said, tears in her eyes. "This isn't just about you. It's about all of us." Sarah felt a mixture of gratitude and anger. She had intended to honor her son's memory, yet the tragic events had transformed into a rallying cry for change. The pain of losing David had intensified, but so too had the determination to ensure his legacy would not be overshadowed by this injustice. The world was watching, and Sarah knew that her story was only beginning to unfold. After the chaotic events of the day, Sarah stood in a state of disbelief. The funeral, which was meant to be a solemn tribute to her son David, had been overshadowed by the shocking confrontation with Officer Jennings. As the time for the service approached, the reality of the situation settled heavily in her chest. She felt as if everything had been irreparably altered. The ceremony began nearly 2 hours late, and the somber mood felt more intense than ever. There were no speeches, no military honors, just a quiet gathering of friends, family, and fellow soldiers mourning the loss of a young life cut short. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady herself as she approached David's casket. The polished wood gleamed under the muted sunlight, and she placed her hand on it, whispering a private farewell that only she and her son would ever hear. "I love you, David," she murmured, the words barely escaping her lips. Despite the overwhelming grief, Sarah felt a quiet strength rising within her. She realized that while the day had been marred by violence and chaos, it was also an opportunity to honor David's sacrifice and the values he had fought for. This was not just a day of mourning. It was a moment to reflect on the greater issues at play and the fight for justice that lay ahead. As the casket was lowered into the ground, Sarah stood tall, her heart aching but resolute. She knew that the image of her kneeling before a drawn weapon would be etched in the minds of many, but she also understood that this was a pivotal moment. It was a chance to shed light on the systemic issues within law enforcement and the struggles faced by people of color. While the world may have witnessed her vulnerability, Sarah was determined to transform her pain into purpose. She would not let David's memory be defined by a moment of tragedy. Instead, she would carry his legacy forward, advocating for change and justice in his name. Months had passed since the explosive events of David's funeral, and the case against Officer Mark Jennings was finally set to go to trial. The courtroom was packed with reporters, military personnel, and members of the community who had rallied around Sarah. They filled the seats, eager to witness the proceedings surrounding the incident that had captured national attention. As Sarah entered the courtroom, she felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. She wore simple civilian attire, a stark contrast to her military uniform. Yet she exuded strength. She was no longer just a grieving mother. She had become a symbol of resilience and the fight for justice. Jennings entered shortly after, dressed in a gray suit that did little to hide the gravity of the situation he faced. His demeanor was cold, showing no sign of remorse as he took his seat. The prosecution presented their case, detailing the events of that fateful day. They played the now infamous footage, capturing the moment Jennings had drawn his weapon on Sarah. The courtroom fell silent, tension hanging in the air as the video played. Gasps echoed as Sarah's calm yet vulnerable figure appeared on screen, hands raised in surrender while a gun was aimed at her chest. Witnesses followed, including Lieutenant Emma Carter, who testified about her swift actions to disarm Jennings. "I had to intervene to stop him from shooting an unarmed woman," she stated firmly, her voice unwavering. Sarah listened, her heart swelling with gratitude for the support she received that day. Then it was Sarah's turn to speak. She approached the stand, her hands shaking slightly, but her resolve unyielding. "I didn't come here for revenge," she stated, her voice steady. "I came here for accountability. No mother should have to fear for her life while mourning her child." The jury listened intently as she shared her story, the pain of losing David evident in her words. When the time for deliberation came, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. After 4 hours, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts. The judge pronounced Jennings' sentence, and Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. Justice had been served, but she knew the fight for equality and respect was far from over. This was just the beginning of a larger movement for change. Following the verdict, the atmosphere outside the courthouse was electric. Reporters surged around Sarah as she stepped onto the steps, flanked by her family and supporters. Microphones were thrust forward, and the crowd buzzed with anticipation. "General Thompson, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you believe justice was served?" one reporter shouted, while another asked if she would pursue further action against the police department. Taking a deep breath, Sarah steadied herself. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she was determined to speak from her heart. "I didn't come here for revenge," she began, her voice clear and strong. "I came here to ensure that no mother has to endure what I went through. Today is not just about me. It's about the countless individuals who have faced injustice simply because of who they are." As she continued, the crowd fell silent, hanging on her every word. Isaiah believed in this country, in service and in sacrifice. What happened at his funeral was not just a mistake. It was a failure of our system, a reflection of the biases that still exist in our society. Her words resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom nodded in agreement. "This isn't just my story. It's a mirror reflecting America's reality. We must confront these issues head-on. Change is necessary, and it starts with each one of us. We cannot remain silent when we witness injustice." As she concluded, the crowd erupted in applause, a wave of support washing over her. Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had transformed her grief into a powerful call for action, igniting a movement that called for accountability and change in law enforcement. The fight for justice was far from over, but today marked a significant step forward, not just for her, but for all those who had suffered in silence. The days following the trial were a whirlwind for Sarah. As the media buzzed with headlines about the verdict and her powerful statements, she found herself at the center of a national conversation about justice, race, and accountability. Despite the attention, Sarah sought solace in the quieter moments, away from the flashing lights and constant scrutiny. One morning, she visited David's grave at Arlington National Cemetery, the early sunlight casting a gentle glow over the serene landscape. With a single sunflower, David's favorite flower, clutched in her hand, she approached the polished headstone. Sitting on a folding chair nearby, she took a deep breath, allowing herself to feel the weight of her loss. The world around her was silent, save for the soft rustling of leaves and the distant sounds of mourning families. "Hi, David," she whispered softly, her voice breaking slightly. "I fought for you. I did what I had to do." Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she felt a sense of peace in this moment of connection. She shared her thoughts about the trial and the changes that were beginning to unfold in the wake of their story. Sarah knew that while the verdict against Officer Jennings brought a sense of justice, the battle for equality and respect was far from over. "I will continue to speak out, to fight for those whose voices have been silenced," she vowed quietly. As she stood to leave, she placed the sunflower gently on the grave, a symbol of love and remembrance. She realized that her grief was not just a burden, but a catalyst for change. The silence that once surrounded injustice would no longer suffocate those seeking a better future. With renewed strength, Sarah walked away from the grave, ready to carry David's legacy forward and to inspire others to join her in the fight for justice. She understood now that silence protects injustice, but truth demands to be heard.